Hi, and welcome to the Glam Reaper podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, aka the Glam Reaper herself. Today on the podcast, we are going to be talking to a super interesting guest, and I am going to leave it at that. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So, take it away. Yeah, again, I don't want to sound like this is an almost paid for podcast by Larry because I agree with you. Again, I do agree
Shocking.
that yeah, I agree that a certain amount of regulation is absolutely imperative for the safety of the public,
Yeah.
but I also agree that there are too many barriers to entry. Like one of the things I've discussed with a funeral home recently is for example, I would absolutely love to go and get myself certified as a funeral director that I could help sign off things, or especially during COVID, that I could have helped provide assistance. However, I have no interest in embalming a body. I don't want to have anything to do with the anatomy part of the course. And so that's a whole section. But you can't do one without doing it all. And I think that's crazy because I feel like, for example, as an event planner, coming into the industry 10 years ago with no experience at the time, and just wanting to get in here and, roll up my sleeves and let's go. I couldn't do a whole lot of anything. I
No,
could in Ireland, but here I can't. There's so many strict regulations that I can't touch anything. I can't hold certain things.
you
It's a
can't
lot.
sign anything.
Yep. Hmm.
And it's sad because there are some states that allow um,
Yeah.
the dual license. And in fact, California, you just need to take a test. I don't think you even need to have a degree or anything. But it's not easy. I mean, they
Yeah.
do make things. I mean, the crematory manager test to open your own crematory in California is. You're still at Camp Frankie Campbell's doing
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And when you told me you did that how many ever years ago, I thought this is perfect for you.
Yeah.
But it does tie your hands with a lot of stuff because the
Yeah.
families, you're bonding with those families, but yet you
Yeah.
got to bring someone in to, and
Yeah.
it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Politics, it's all
A-
politics.
Absolutely, it's all politics. Yeah, and it is. I mean, we could again do a whole other podcast on just the politics that are in the funeral community. That each state, funeral wise, was so different requirements. That even during COVID, didn't they have to release some sort of like the state had to allow funeral directors from other states, say, to come to New York?
Yep.
Wasn't that a thing?
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and
That
they had to. I mean, there was no reciprocity for licensure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I even have a friend in Canada that was going to come as part of one of the disaster services, Kenyan, and the hoops he would have had to have jumped through, and then he just said, "You know what? They've got enough people. I'm not even going to do it."
Yeah.
And he's been to Haiti. He's been to. He worked the UPS flight that went down in Bagram. Um,
Oh.
he's done plane crashes in like the
Oh,
Arctic
sounds like
Circle.
somebody
Oh
needs to
yeah,
give. I'd
oh
love
yeah,
that.
I can give you this info for sure.
Yeah. And you had an
And
EOR person as well, actually,
an
right?
ER person, yeah, his wife is an ER nurse.
Oh, okay. So,
Did I
amazing.
already tell you about him?
Yeah, you told me about her, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
He would be good too, and he he has a really good perspective, and he is a funeral director, so a lot of times we'll not clash because we're like brothers, so you know how that goes.
Yeah.
Um, he will have to stop and think, and then he's like, ah. And I just think that's kind of cool that, we have to be able to listen no matter what. All of this stuff that we're talking about, it's just this.
Yes,
It's,
absolutely. You might not agree with somebody. I mean, one of my I'm such an argumentative person, but one of the things I've learned in the last 10 years is just, if you feel like it's getting too frictional, I agree. Let's just agree to disagree because I feel
yep,
like we're not gonna, and that's okay. That's okay. Just move
nothing
along.
wrong with it at all.
Yeah.
Yep. And you know, I always say, as long as you listen to what I have to say and consider it,
Yeah.
and you don't have to agree after that,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
I've got weird ideas that people think I'm crazy, and you know what? That's fine. You don't
it's
have to agree with me.
it's true. Now, on that note, because I have something, and I know we're like an hour in already. So, do you have to run anywhere?
No, not really.
Okay, another 20 minutes or so, because I just have one of the things. So, La- Larry, so you consult with crematoriums and funeral directors on how to increase their cremation business, or how to.
Well, it's everything from I want to start a crematory. I have a funeral home. I want to start a crematory. I have a cemetery. I want to start a crematory. I
Okay.
don't want a crematory, but my cremation rate is 70%. I need you to help me with chain of custody so that my liability is reduced. I do this thing with the Cremation Association of North America. I'm a member benefit. Um, you get a half an hour free with me, which, you know, it ends up being more than that. But to develop an iron
No, I definitely don't believe that.
But to develop an ironclad standard operating procedure, including ID protocols and um, chain of custody, because the minute someone accuses you of cremating the wrong person, and this is whether or not you have your own unit, you cannot prove whose ashes, whose cremated remains are in that container. There's no DNA left. There's no way to do it. So the only way is your policies, your procedures, the fact that you implemented them, the fact that you enforced them, and the fact that you save the documentation and adapt when you need to adapt.
Right.
That's probative in court, but that is so unheard of in our space. From the sixth generation funeral home, I mean, I had a client who said, "Oh, Larry, we don't need to ID. We know everybody who's in our care. We're a small town." And I just went, "Are you kidding me right now?" Well, we put a sticky note on all the cremation bodies. I'm not making this up.
I believe it. I just don't think our listeners will.
But you know, with all due respect, this firm hired me to fix all that,
Yeah.
and they are a
And
smooth running ship right now.
well, and here's the thing. In their defense, this was how it was done.
Yes,
We've got
absolutely.
to remember, it's a bit like we were saying earlier, it's a bit like the internet. When the internet first started, I mean, it was www dot, I mean, it was called the World Wide Web. Like, it has evolved so much. Now we've got to protect, there's legislation. I mean, I don't know how many terms and conditions I click sign. Yeah, done, done,
Yeah, and
done.
we don't read any of it.
Don't read any of them. So, absolutely, like every other industry, it's evolved. A sticky note and knowing you had Joe and John and Mary and Jim Bob and whatever in the back of your
Jim
trunk.
Bob. He's from County Cork.
But I listen. I get it. As coming from a small island, I get it. I mean, I know I'm a dub and from the city, but like I know in rural Ireland, absolutely, they 100% knew because their turnover was probably maybe one body a week,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
so
So that's one of the biggest things, and I really enjoy doing that because I get to problem solve and I get to enlighten. And a lot of times I've changed my opinion of what I think should happen based on the culture of the funeral home or the cemetery. Um, I do a lot of air quality permitting, testifying, if you will, zoning. One of the hardest things is to convince a community that the crematory is not going to cause mercury poisoning, and the emissions are not human remains, and all this other stuff. So I do stuff like that. Um,
now I
I
have a
can
question.
design with
Sorry,
that.
I
No,
have a
no,
question
it's okay.
on that.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel about all of these new forms of disposal, body disposal? So, um, you know, like obviously we've got Katrina in Seattle with her composting, and we have the alkaline hydrolysis, which has about 100 different names. I can never keep track. Biocremation, water cremation, all of the different ones. Obviously, you know, my background was with Eco Legacy. But what is your opinion on cremation versus them, or cremation evolving into them? Is it something you're open to? Do you just, or I'll let you.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny you mentioned Katrina. She wasn't the first to get licensed for the composting. I forget the guy's
Oh,
name, but I was on a basically a panel discussion with him with some folks at Warsham, Lily and Brian, and I can't remember who else. And we kind of gave him some advice, and he actually got his license to operate. And I don't know that Katrina is licensed yet. I hope
oh,
she is.
yeah.
Um, I have no problem with new technology of any form,
Hmm.
as long as it's transparent.
Yeah.
You know, saying that alkaline hydrolysis is a gentle, it's water. Come on, guys. There's chemicals involved. You've got to disclose that because A, it's ethically the right thing to do, and B, one, if you say it's just a gentle heated water bath and they find out that you've put lye and shook them up, you're going to get sued and you're going to lose. But I have no problem with the technologies. Eco Legacy I thought was brilliant. The issue bringing that here wasn't necessarily the method of disposition, but the fact that you had multiple bodies in one unit. So that would have been a hurdle, even though they're separate and there's no way you can mix them. The politics, right? It says in our bylaws that, you know. So I absolutely embrace anything new. And if it's a success, especially if the consumer isn't, if it's a top down innovation, it's much harder to get the consumers to understand it. As you know,
Yeah.
it took alkaline hydrolysis so long, and there's still only 22 states, I think, 22 that allow it.
Hmm.
Um, Again, back to politics. There's nothing, I mean, if it's a safe technology and if it's transparent and it doesn't hurt the earth, um, and it does what it needs to do, I'm all for it. I actually am starting a cremation equipment company that I don't want to really talk about this too much, but
Okay.
it's not going to be powered by fossil fuels. So there'll be no hydrocarbons um, cremating the body, and there will be flame. It's a combustion situation, but not burning hydrocarbons, and um, can be sustainable sources of power that would create a negative carbon footprint. So that within the next 6 months to a year may be a reality in the U.S. Um, and you know, I'm all for better ways to do things. So
Right.
that was a really long answer to your question, and I apologize, but I really did want to explain where I'm coming from because, you know, at first I thought you can't call that cremation, but yeah, you can.
Mm.
And when you said, is that what it's going to evolve into? I absolutely know that the technology, as it increases in efficiency, 20 years from now, God only knows how we're going to be disposing of bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does, you know, a bit like burial. We're running out of burial space. It, the population, you know,
Yeah.
it's, we've got to go somewhere. And so the more environmentally friendly way we can do that, I guess, the better. And just for Joe Public, when a body is cremated,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the things that I found fascinating was that, like, so New York doesn't have a crematorium within Manhattan.
Right.
Um,
It's
believe
illegal.
Yeah, for pollution reasons. And yet London, who I would always consider New York and London quite similar in terms of city style, has a crematorium. And
Yep, the City
so,
of London Crematory.
yeah,
I've
there
been
you
there.
go. Exactly. And so the idea that Joe Public out there could be breathing in the dead.
But that's not true.
Yeah. Okay. So talk a bit about that, because that can be a fear mongering thing out
Yeah,
there.
and it definitely is. And I won't get too technical because chemistry is involved. And I hate chemistry, and a lot of people hate chemistry. But when the body is on fire, if you will,
Yeah.
a process called combustion is happening where it's being broken down. The body, the cells in the body are being destroyed basically. And when you burn something, you create gases, smoke and flame, and lots of gas because everything gets vaporized. In cremation, those gases we call the products of combustion, and we actually recombust those gases again in a second chamber within that unit at a hotter temperature, even. And what happens in that chamber is everything is diluted down to the atomic level. Molecules, say a hydrocarbon, say methane natural gas, is CH4. Well, those molecules split and you have carbon and four hydrogens. What we bring into the game is air, oxygen. You need oxygen for combustion, and you also need it for perfect combustion. And what perfect combustion is basically the carbon hooks up with two oxygens in this second chamber, and the hydrogen, two hydrogens hook up with an oxygen, carbon dioxide, water vapor. Nitrogen is just nitrogen. It goes out of the stack. We breathe it in every day. It's not harmful. Our air is mostly nitrogen. So when stuff comes out of the stack and you can see it and it's black, smoke,
Mm-hmm.
all that is carbon. It's not the dead. It used to be, but it's been transformed into nothing but an element off of the periodic chart of elements.
Right.
So, I get really not offended, but I get upset when I see articles like there was one out of Southern California, I won't say what city, Cortez, where the fire chief actually told the media that, yes, I can confirm that billowing black smoke is human remains. And the community went absolutely apeshit. And I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. There, I love this phrase from a colleague of mine here in Tulsa. He says, "That's your ass talking because your mouth knows better." I hope that answers your question without getting too technical, but this is a clean technology. We're not even regulated by the federal government. And the only reason that states regulate it is because of the myths about it. Incinerators cause pollution, but this type of incinerator is not, it's only designed for human and animal remains.
Right.
And organic stuff turns into other stuff during combustion. So carbon dioxide and water. The inorganic stuff is dust at the end, and that actually will settle into that secondary chamber, so it does not go out of the stack. A fireplace puts out more particles a fireplace could put out about half a pound an hour of dust.
Wow.
Yeah, a wood burning fireplace.
Yeah.
And a crematory, nothing hardly. Like
Right.
0.02, I think, is a good emissions factor for that.
Right. And then the remains that are left after the body has been disintegrated completely, you're left with what looks like sort of dust and bone fragment. And some people I've noticed are quite shocked sometimes when they have the larger bone particles.
Yeah.
And then I know from our own cremation jewelry line. And I know even from, we did a podcast with Parting Stone with Justin, and we were talking about sort of the different colors that it, when you reintroduce heat to remains, whether it's a solidified remain as in his rocks or my glass jewelry, that it adds its own colors, which I find beautiful and fascinating and just
Yeah,
shows how
me
unique
too.
they are. Yeah. But maybe could you talk a bit more about the remains and the myth or not, that you can bury them and they can turn into a tree?
Okay, that's wonderful. I love that. I didn't know where you were going until you said tree. I will touch on the cremated remains coloring. And Parting Stone, brilliant. I'm on his board. I love Justin. I have a call with him tomorrow. Um,
Tell them I said hi.
I will. It's just such a lovely idea because you can have permanent memorialization and not be in an urn. You could put them in the garden or give
Yeah.
them away. It's just, I love it. I'm not here to advertise for him, but it's a worthy thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, the color, the biggest common color is green. You see a hint of green on the cremated remains, and
That's clearly the 1 to 75% Irish that everybody is.
exactly, of course.
I
And
hear that.
I tell that joke every time I present a training class. You know what that means? They're Irish.
Yeah. Well, because I swear to God, and this is totally unrelated, but you know how I feel about this. But every single American I ever meet tells me there's some part of Irish lineage, right? So I've just turned around and I'm like, seriously, for the tiny island of Ireland, did we just go at it like rabbits and procreate the entire world? I mean, it feels like it. So there's the
Everyone
green.
wants to be Irish.
So
That's it
there's
right
that green. It's showing up.
there. It's all about the Lucky Charms.
Oh,
I
they're
won't
mighty.
make you say it. But cremated remains are not skeleton. They're not bone fragments. Scientifically, they're calcium, they're phosphates, sulfates, and hard metals.